Rain lashed down in sheets, drumming against the grimy, ancient windows of the old Victorian mansion. It was a bleak night in Arkham, Massachusetts, and the wind howled like a lament through the city's narrow alleys. The electricity flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows across furniture draped in white sheets, lending a ghostly air to Dr. Eleanor Vance's residence. Eleanor, a psychiatrist renowned for her innovative approach and her ability to handle the most complex cases, was lost in thought, watching the raindrops slide down the glass. Her blue eyes, usually expressive and full of life, now carried a heavy weight of concern. A week ago, an unmarked envelope had arrived. Inside, a single sheet of paper bore an official stamp and the faded logo of the Holy Sepulchre Asylum, an isolated, almost forgotten sanatorium on the outskirts of town. Rumors clung to the place, brutal treatments, vanishing patients, and a medical staff operating under an almost absolute veil of secrecy. The letter was an invitation, or rather, a summons. It requested Dr. Vance's immediate presence to evaluate a particular patient, someone whose condition was described as unique and unprecedented. The letter's tone was urgent, almost imperative, stirring both Eleanor's curiosity and her caution. She stood up, feeling the chill that seeped in through the window crack. Her white lab coat, a symbol of her profession and her commitment to science, seemed to weigh heavily on her shoulders. Beside the letter, on her solid oak desk, lay a black and white photograph. In it, a young man with deep, melancholic eyes stared directly into the camera. His name, Marcus Thorne, was scribbled on the back. The accompanying description mentioned that he had been found wandering disoriented near a remote rural area, repeating disconnected phrases about obedience and the voice. No identification records, no family, just the mystery that enveloped him. The night deepened, and the storm intensified. Eleanor felt a strange mix of apprehension and excitement. The Holy Sepulchre Asylum was not a place for the curious, but something about Marcus Thorne's case intrigued her deeply. She had dealt with cases of schizophrenia, dissociative identity disorder, and delusions, but Marcus's description seemed to go beyond her understanding. The mention of obedience and the voice echoed in her mind, suggesting a compulsion or external control that traditional medicine couldn't easily explain. As Eleanor prepared for the journey, picking up her leather briefcase and a heavy coat, the distant wail of an ambulance siren cut through the night's silence. It was a familiar sound, but tonight it seemed more sinister, perhaps a premonition. She looked again at Marcus Thorne's photograph, wondering what had led him to that state, what he had seen or heard. What awaited her at the Holy Sepulchre Asylum? What did the voice truly mean? Her intuition screamed at her not to go, but her thirst for knowledge and her desire to help the patient called her to that place of darkness and uncertainty. She knew that once she crossed the gates of Holy Sepulchre, the line between sanity and madness might become dangerously thin. The rain, now more intense, seemed to wash away the hope from the city, leaving only the darkness and mystery that awaited her. If you're intrigued by the mystery of the Holy Sepulchre Asylum and want to know what awaits Dr. Eleanor Vance, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters of this dark story. Remember, this is a work of fiction. The drive to the Holy Sepulchre Asylum was a descent into isolation. Eleanor's vintage sedan, usually reliable, felt small and vulnerable against the relentless downpour and the winding, unlit roads. The further she drove from Arkham's sparse streetlights, the denser the forest became, its ancient trees looming like skeletal guardians. The GPS signal wavered, and for long stretches, she was guided only by the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the rain-slicked asphalt. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, a stark contrast to the familiar urban humidity of the city. Finally, a break in the trees revealed a monstrous silhouette against the stormy sky, the Holy Sepulchre Asylum. It was less a building, more a fortress of despair. High, jagged stone walls, stained dark with age and moisture, encircled the property, topped with rusted barbed wire. The main gate, a wrought iron monstrosity adorned with twisted, vaguely religious symbols, stood ajar, groaning on ancient hinges. A single flickering gas lamp cast an eerie glow, illuminating nothing but the wet gravel path leading into the darkness. The institution seemed to breathe, its very presence suffocating the surrounding landscape. No manicured lawns, no welcoming light, just an imposing, decaying structure that screamed abandonment and sorrow. Eleanor pulled up to the gate, the car's headlights cutting through the oppressive gloom. A small, hunched figure emerged from a shadow near a guardhouse, moving with a shuffling gait. It was an orderly, a gaunt man with a perpetual stoop and eyes that seemed too wide for his face, like a startled bird. His uniform, a drab grey, hung loosely on his frame. "Dr. Vance?" the orderly croaked, his voice raspy, barely audible over the rain. He didn't wait for an answer, simply motioned with a trembling hand towards the main building. "They're expecting you. Dr. Finch is waiting." There was a tremor in his voice, a hint of fear or resignation that Eleanor couldn't quite decipher. He didn't meet her gaze, his eyes darting restlessly. Parking her car by a lone, gnarled oak, Eleanor stepped out into the biting wind. The asylum loomed larger now, its Gothic architecture a testament to an era when mental health care was shrouded in mystery and fear. Gargoyles leered from ledges, their stone faces eroded by centuries of weather. Every window seemed to be a dark, vacant eye staring out into the storm. A profound silence, broken only by the relentless rain, pressed down on her. It was the kind of silence that suggests secrets, the kind that swallows sound and hope whole. Inside, the asylum was a labyrinth of echoing corridors, lit by sparse, yellowed bulbs that flickered weakly. The air was cold and stale, smelling faintly of antiseptic, dust, and something else, a coppery, almost metallic tang that was hard to place. The walls were painted a sickly pale green, peeling in places, revealing layers of age and neglect. Every step Eleanor took resonated loudly in the oppressive quiet. She passed numerous closed doors, some with small barred windows, and she could hear faint, unidentifiable sounds from within. A low moan, a distant cough, the soft scrape of something against a wall. As she navigated a particularly dark hallway, she noticed an unusual rigidity in the small details. Each patient door was not only locked, but secured with multiple heavy bolts, as if containing something far more dangerous than just disturbed minds. The few orderlies she glimpsed were unnervingly silent, moving with a practiced, almost robotic efficiency. They wore identical, grim expressions, and none offered a greeting or a glance of recognition. It was a hierarchy of silence and control, a pervasive sense of order that felt deeply unsettling, almost unnatural. Suddenly, a door creaked open ahead. An elderly nurse, her face a web of wrinkles and her uniform impeccably starched despite the asylum's decay, peered out. Her eyes, though tired, held a flicker of something, a spark of lingering empathy that the others seemed to lack. As Eleanor approached, the nurse quickly glanced around, then leaned in, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "Be careful, doctor," she murmured, her gaze darting towards the end of the corridor where a larger figure, presumably Dr. Finch, stood observing. "Not everything here is as it seems, and some forms of obedience are not a choice." Before Eleanor could respond or ask for clarification, the nurse pulled back, her face once again a mask of weary indifference as Dr. Finch's imposing frame began to move towards them. The first chilling hint had been dropped, leaving Eleanor with a growing unease and a gnawing premonition that her scientific expertise might be ill-equipped for the true nature of this place. Dr. Alistair Finch was everything Eleanor hadn't expected. Not the wild-eyed madman of B-movies, but a figure of unsettling calm and meticulous order. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, his silver hair neatly combed back from a high forehead. His eyes, though piercing, held a disconcerting placidness, like a still lake hiding immeasurable depths. His voice was smooth, almost hypnotic, devoid of any discernible emotion as he greeted her. "Dr. Vance, we've been expecting you. Your reputation precedes you." And there was no warmth, only a veiled authority that felt absolute. He led her through more corridors, each identical to the last, until they reached a secluded wing. The air here was even colder, the silence heavier. "Mr. Thorne is a unique case," Dr. Finch began, his voice a low hum. "Highly susceptible to influence. We believe his condition stems from a profound break with reality, exacerbated by a deep-seated need for structure. He seeks a voice to guide him." Eleanor noted the careful phrasing, the subtle framing of Marcus's symptoms. It felt too rehearsed, too clinical, given the urgency of the letter. They stopped before a reinforced door, thicker than any other she'd seen. A small, barred window allowed a glimpse inside. Marcus Thorne sat on a narrow cot, his back to the door, staring intently at the peeling paint of the opposite wall. He was thin, almost skeletal, his posture unnaturally rigid. "We believe he responds best to a calm, authoritative presence," Dr. Finch instructed, unlocking the door. "He can be volatile, if provoked." His words were a subtle warning, an implicit challenge to Eleanor's methods. Eleanor stepped into the sparsely furnished room. The air was stale, tinged with a faint, cloying sweetness she couldn't identify. Marcus didn't stir immediately. She approached cautiously, her voice soft but steady. "Marcus, my name is Dr. Vance. I'm here to help you." He slowly turned, his eyes, so striking in the photograph, now seemed sunken and shadowed, but held an unnerving intensity. They were lucid, almost too lucid for someone described as completely disoriented. He didn't speak for a long moment, simply observed her, his head tilted slightly as if listening to something beyond her perception. "The voice," Marcus finally whispered, his voice hoarse, a dry rasp. "It tells me what to do, what to think. It's always there." He gestured vaguely towards his head. "It's clear, unyielding." He then suddenly clenched his fists, his body tensing, a spasm of contained frustration. But sometimes it wavers, a flicker, a thought that isn't mine, but isn't the voice either. That's when it hurts. Eleanor pressed gently. "What does it tell you, Marcus? What does it command?" His eyes darted to the ceiling, then back to her. To obey, to follow the rules, to conform. He spoke the word conform with a peculiar emphasis, as if it carried a deeper, more sinister meaning. "It makes things simple, but it takes away." He trailed off, his gaze becoming distant, his eyes losing their focus as if a switch had been flipped. He looked utterly drained, a puppet whose strings had momentarily gone slack. Eleanor noticed a small, almost imperceptible detail. On the wall opposite the cot, a faint geometric pattern was etched into the plaster. It was barely visible, a series of interconnected lines forming a complex, repetitive design. It looked like something someone would carve out of sheer boredom, but there was an unnatural precision to it, almost like circuitry. She glanced at Marcus, then back at the pattern. Was it a focus of his obsession? Or was it a visual cue, something that the voice reinforced? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. "Marcus," she began again, trying to bring him back. "Who is the voice?" But he had retreated. His eyes were now vacant, his body slumped slightly, a shell of the man who had just spoken with such chilling clarity. He began to hum a low, tuneless melody, monotonous and repetitive, the sound devoid of any joy. It was a sound of absolute mechanical obedience. Dr. Finch, who had been observing from the doorway, stepped back, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "As you can see, Dr. Vance," he said, his voice flat, "a complex case. We manage it with a structured environment." Eleanor felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Marcus's sudden shifts, the precise pattern on the wall, Dr. Finch's chilling demeanor, none of it fit neatly into a psychiatric diagnosis. This wasn't just a mental illness. This was something else entirely. Something was being done to Marcus, and she had a terrifying suspicion that the Holy Sepulchre Asylum was not a place of healing, but a crucible for a terrifying experiment in control. The faint, sweet smell in the room, the strange geometric pattern. They were clues, whispers in the echoing walls, hinting at a truth far more disturbing than she could have imagined. The next few days at Holy Sepulchre were a slow, suffocating immersion into its chilling routine. Eleanor found herself navigating a world where silence was a default and obedience the ultimate virtue. She tried to glean more information, questioning the few nurses and orderlies she encountered. Their responses were always the same, vague, circular, and utterly unhelpful. They spoke of patient protocols and Dr. Finch's methods with an almost religious reverence, their eyes blank, their expressions devoid of anything but weary compliance. It was as if their personalities had been systematically dulled, their individuality stripped away by the asylum's oppressive atmosphere. She observed the daily schedule, precise waking times, identical meals served at exact intervals, structured therapy sessions that seemed to consist of monotonous group chanting and repetitive physical exercises, all performed with a disturbing uniformity. There was no room for deviation, no space for spontaneity. Every aspect of the patients' lives was meticulously choreographed. Eleanor noticed several patients exhibiting similar traits to Marcus. A vacant stare, a sudden, inexplicable tremor, the low, tuneless humming, and an unsettlingly passive demeanor. It was as if they were all connected by an invisible thread of forced compliance. Her initial scientific skepticism, her belief in observable facts and rational explanations, began to fray under the relentless pressure of the asylum's pervasive dread. The atmosphere seeped into her bones, chilling her more than the damp Massachusetts air. She felt a constant, prickling sensation of being watched, an unseen presence that lingered just beyond her peripheral vision. Sometimes she'd catch a fleeting glimpse of a shadow shifting down a corridor, or the soft click of a door closing just as she turned a corner. It was unnerving, an insidious erosion of her sense of privacy and safety. One evening, while making notes in her temporary office, a cramped, dusty room with a single grimy window, she left her small, leather-bound journal on the desk while she went to fetch a cup of lukewarm tea from the communal kitchen. When she returned, the journal was slightly ajar, no longer neatly closed. A small, almost imperceptible scratch mark had appeared on its leather cover. Had someone touched it? Or was it merely her mind playing tricks, amplified by the pervasive paranoia of the asylum? The incident, minor as it seemed, solidified her conviction that she was under constant surveillance. Eleanor attempted to contact her colleagues back in Arkham. The asylum's single landline, located in Dr. Finch's office, was unavailable for external calls, according to the stony-faced receptionist. Her cell phone, she discovered, had no signal whatsoever within the asylum's thick stone walls. She was effectively cut off, isolated in this desolate fortress. The realization hit her with a cold dread. She was truly trapped. The isolation intensified her resolve. She started documenting everything secretly. She used a tiny voice-activated recorder she'd brought for patient sessions, now using it to narrate her observations late at night. She sketched the strange geometric pattern from Marcus's room, noticing similar, though less defined, markings on other walls in the patient wing. She began to hypothesize that these patterns were not random, but integral to the conditioning process. Perhaps visual cues, combined with something auditory, were being used to implant the obedience. The idea was terrifying, a perversion of therapeutic techniques. As the days blurred into an indistinguishable cycle of quiet terror, Eleanor felt the walls of her own rationality closing in. The patient's vacant stares, the staff's chilling compliance. Doctor. Finch's unsettling calm, and the overwhelming sense of being constantly watched, it all coalesced into a suffocating blanket of psychological horror. She was no longer just a doctor observing a patient. She was a detective, unraveling a sinister puzzle. And with every piece she uncovered, the threat to her own sanity, and perhaps her life, became more palpable. The whispering walls seemed to taunt her, daring her to uncover the dark truth they guarded. If the creeping dread of the Holy Sepulchre Asylum has you on edge, don't miss a single chilling detail. Subscribe to the channel now for the full story. This is a work of fiction. Eleanor knew her best chance lay with Marcus. If anyone could provide a true window into the asylum's methods, it was him. Over the next few days, she dedicated longer sessions to him, adopting a gentle, empathetic approach that contrasted sharply with the asylum's rigid protocols. She didn't push him, didn't challenge his voice, but instead encouraged him to describe it, to explore the sensations it caused. She brought him simple, non-threatening items, a sketch pad and pencils, a worn deck of cards, and patiently waited for moments of connection. Slowly, painstakingly, Marcus began to open up, not fully, but in fragmented bursts. His eyes, though still often distant, would occasionally flicker with a glimmer of his former self. A brief spark of awareness before the voice seemed to reassert its control. He described the voice not as an auditory hallucination in the traditional sense, but as an impulse, a powerful, unyielding suggestion that bypassed his conscious thought. "It's like a path," he whispered one afternoon, his fingers tracing aimless patterns on the dusty floor. "A path laid out for you, and you just follow. You have to follow, even if you don't want to, especially if you don't want to." He explained how it started subtly, a feeling of vague unease that would be soothed by performing a specific action, a small, seemingly innocent compliance. Over time, these impulses grew stronger, the actions more defined, until the voice became an omnipresent dictator of his thoughts and behaviors. He described moments of brief clarity, flickers, as he called them, where he felt an overwhelming surge of panic and resistance, only for the voice to flood him with a sense of calm, followed by an irresistible urge to obey. "It's peaceful," he said, his eyes empty. "When you stop fighting, it's peaceful." The chilling implication was clear. The peace came from absolute surrender. Eleanor, feigning casual observation, spent more time in the common areas, watching other patients. She saw it now, unmistakable. The same sudden, vacant expressions, the same low, repetitive hum, the same unnaturally precise movements when performing simple tasks, like folding laundry or eating. There was a disturbing pattern of similar obedient behaviors across a significant portion of the patient population, especially those who had been at Holy Sepulchre for an extended period. This wasn't simply a shared delusion, it was a shared condition, and it was being meticulously maintained, if not actively induced. She started to suspect that the asylum's treatments were not for healing, but for instilling this very obedience. The repetitive chanting, the structured exercises, the carefully controlled environment, they were all part of a larger, insidious program. But how? What was the mechanism? One night, feigning a need for specific patient files, Eleanor managed to slip into the asylum's records room, a cluttered, forgotten space in the basement. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and mildew. While sifting through dusty archives, Far from the modern digitized files Dr. Finch likely kept, she stumbled upon an old, leather-bound logbook, its pages yellowed and brittle. It was a maintenance log from decades ago, detailing repairs and equipment checks. Buried within the mundane entries, she found something unsettling. Several entries spanning a period about 10 years prior repeatedly mentioned calibrating the resonant frequency generators in the patient wings and testing the low-frequency auditory emitters. Further down, there were notes about adjustments to the localized sound dampening fields and ensuring consistent frequency dispersion across all patient areas. Resonant frequency generators, low-frequency auditory emitters. This wasn't standard psychiatric equipment. This sounded like technology designed to manipulate, to influence, not to heal. And the sound dampening fields suggested an attempt to prevent external sounds from interfering with these internal frequencies. Eleanor's mind raced. What if the voice Marcus heard wasn't a delusion, but an artificially induced auditory sensation? A highly specific low-frequency sound or vibration designed to bypass conscious hearing and directly influence brain patterns, inducing a state of heightened suggestibility and ultimately obedience. It was a terrifying, yet chillingly plausible, non-supernatural explanation for Marcus's symptoms and the widespread obedience she was observing. The sweet, cloying smell in Marcus's room, perhaps a subtle chemical agent, undetectable by ordinary senses, that amplified the effects of these frequencies, creating a state of perpetual compliance. The geometric patterns, visual anchors, subconsciously linking the sound to a visible command, reinforcing the conditioning. The pieces of the dark puzzle were finally beginning to connect, revealing a horrifying truth about Holy Sepulchre Asylum. Armed with the unsettling discovery from the old logbook, Eleanor's resolve hardened. She knew she couldn't delay. The information about the resonant frequency generators and auditory emitters was too specific, too disturbing, to be dismissed as mere historical curiosities. It was the missing link, the physical mechanism behind the obedience she was witnessing. She had to confront Dr. Finch. The next morning, Eleanor requested a private meeting with him. He granted it without hesitation, his calm demeanor unwavering, which only served to heighten her unease. His office was a stark reflection of his personality, meticulously organized, sparse, and devoid of any personal touches, save for a single anachronistic gramophone on a side table. Sunlight, weak and diffused by the perpetually gray skies, struggled to penetrate the room's heavy curtains. "Dr. Finch," Eleanor began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I've been reviewing some of the older maintenance logs. I found some peculiar entries, references to resonant frequency generators and low-frequency auditory emitters in the patient wings. Could you explain their purpose?" Dr. Finch's eyes, usually so placid, narrowed almost imperceptibly. A faint, almost imperceptible muscle twitched in his jaw. For a moment, the smooth facade wavered, revealing a flicker of something cold and sharp beneath. "Ah, historical equipment, Dr. Vance," he said, his voice still smooth, but with an underlying edge. "Relics of an earlier, more experimental era. Primitive attempts at neuromodulation. We no longer employ such crude methods." "Crude methods?" Eleanor pressed, pushing past the feigned nonchalance. "From what I've observed, many of your patients exhibit behaviors consistent with highly advanced forms of behavioral conditioning, bordering on an induced state of absolute compliance. Marcus Thorne, for instance. His voice seems less like a delusion and more like an external constant instruction." She watched his face carefully, searching for a crack in his composure. He leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, deliberate movement. A chilling smile, devoid of warmth, touched his lips. Dr. Vance, you are a brilliant diagnostician, I concede, but perhaps your theories are exceeding the bounds of the empirically provable. Our methods here are simply about creating the optimal environment for patient recovery. Structure, routine, discipline. Some patients, like Mr. Thorne, benefit immensely from a clear framework. It calms their anxieties, gives them purpose. Purpose? Or subjugation? Eleanor countered, her voice rising slightly. I've observed a complete lack of independent thought in many long-term patients. Their reactions are almost pre-programmed. This isn't therapy, Dr. Finch. This is control. And those relics in the basement logs, they suggest a very specific, technologically advanced method of control. Sub-auditory frequencies, perhaps. Imperceptible sounds designed to bypass conscious hearing and influence neural pathways, creating a receptive state for suggestion, for obedience. The air in the room thickened. Dr. Finch's smile vanished completely. His eyes were now like chips of ice, sharp and unblinking. "Dr. Vance," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "You seem to have developed a rather vivid imagination during your brief stay. An unfortunate side effect of prolonged exposure to certain environments, perhaps." He paused, his gaze fixed on her. "You arrived here with a specific purpose, to evaluate Mr. Thorne. You have fulfilled that purpose. I believe your services are no longer required." Eleanor felt a jolt of fear. He was dismissing her. He knew she was onto him. "I haven't completed my evaluation of Marcus," she insisted, trying to buy time, to appear unfazed. "Oh, but you have," Dr. Finch said, standing up and walking around his desk, his movements unnervingly silent. He stopped directly in front of her, casting a long shadow. "Your observations are clear. Mr. Thorne requires a structured, long-term environment, precisely what we offer here at Holy Sepulchre. You see, Dr. Vance, our patients find peace through obedience, and for those who resist, the peace eventually finds them." His words hung in the air, a thinly veiled threat. "You would do well to remember that. We value compliance, from patients, from staff, from visitors." He was telling her, without ambiguity, that she was now part of his system. Her life was in danger. She felt a cold knot in her stomach. Dr. Finch wasn't just a controlling administrator, he was the architect of a horrifying, systematic form of psychological manipulation, and she was now a liability. She had to act, and quickly, before the peace found her too. The asylum, which had seemed like a prison for the mind, was now a literal cage. The chilling confrontation with Dr. Finch left Eleanor with no illusions. She was trapped, and her only way out was to expose the truth. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed an ally, someone on the inside who hadn't been completely subsumed by the asylum's oppressive control. Her mind immediately went to the elderly nurse, Mrs. Albright, who had whispered the warning on her first night. Mrs. Albright's eyes, though weary, had held a flicker of something human, something beyond the blank compliance of the other staff. Eleanor waited until nightfall, when the asylum's eerie quiet was at its deepest. She knew Mrs. Albright's shift ended late. She found her in the staff break room, hunched over a cup of tea, her back to the door. Eleanor approached cautiously. "Mrs. Albright," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. The old nurse flinched, her teacup rattling against the saucer. She turned slowly, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and surprise. "Dr. Vance? What are you doing here?" Her voice was tremulous. "I need your help," Eleanor said, stepping closer, keeping her voice low and urgent. "I know what's happening here. I know about the obedience, the frequencies, the way Dr. Finch is manipulating these patients." She laid the worn leather logbook she had smuggled from the basement onto the table, open to the pages detailing the resonant frequency generators. "This isn't therapy, Mrs. Albright. This is something far more sinister, and I believe you know it." Mrs. Albright's gaze fell on the logbook. Her frail hand trembled as she reached out to touch the yellowed pages. A deep sigh, heavy with years of suppressed fear and sorrow, escaped her lips. I knew something wasn't right," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "Patients changing, losing themselves, becoming empty. I tried to speak up once, years ago. Dr. Finch, he has ways of making people compliant, threats, blackmail. And for some, I've seen how they start to look like the patients, always listening, always obeying. I got scared. I just put my head down and tried to survive." A tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. "But what can we do? He has eyes everywhere." "We can expose him," Eleanor insisted, her eyes fixed on Mrs. Albright's. "I've documented everything. Marcus's statements, my observations of the other patients, the logs. But I need proof that can't be dismissed as my vivid imagination. We need something concrete, something that reveals the active mechanism, not just the old records. I need to get into the main control room where those frequencies are being generated, or find the schematics, the modern operational logs. They must be somewhere." Mrs. Albright's face was etched with a profound internal struggle. Fear warred with a flicker of long-dormant courage. The control room, it's in the sub-basement, heavily secured. Only Dr. Finch and his most trusted technical staff have access. But there's a ventilation shaft access panel in the old laundry room. It leads down there. It's dusty, tight, but it might be a way in. I've heard the engineers talking about it years ago when they had to run some new cables. She bit her lip, her eyes filled with a desperate hope. There's also a secondary server room on the 3rd floor. Sometimes copies of the daily frequency calibration logs are backed up there, just in case of a system crash. Less secure than the control room itself, maybe. A plan began to form in Eleanor's mind. Reckless and dangerous, but their only option. If we can get into either of those places, we might find the evidence we need, but we have to be meticulous, and we have to move fast. Finch is on to me. "And what about Marcus?" Mrs. Albright asked, her gaze drifting toward the closed door. "What about all of them? If we do this, what happens to them?" "We get them out," Eleanor vowed, her voice firm. "We expose Finch and we get them proper help. But we need to act together. Are you with me, Mrs. Albright? Or will you let this nightmare continue?" Mrs. Albright looked at the logbook, then at Eleanor's determined face. The fear was still there, but a new resolve began to solidify in her tired eyes. "My name is not Mrs. Albright, Dr. Vance, it's Sarah. And yes, I'm with you. We have to try. For Marcus. For all of them." A fragile, desperate alliance was forged in the cold, silent heart of the Holy Sepulchre Asylum. The stakes were impossibly high. Their lives, and the minds of countless patients, hung in the balance. The path ahead was fraught with peril, every shadow a potential watcher, every creak of the old building a possible betrayer. But for the first time since she arrived, Eleanor felt a glimmer of hope, a shared burden that made the overwhelming task seem, if not easy, then at least possible. If the escalating suspense of Eleanor and Sarah's plan has you on the edge of your seat, subscribe to the channel to witness their desperate fight for truth. The night for their daring operation arrived, a symphony of driving rain and howling wind, a perfect cover. Eleanor and Sarah had meticulously planned their moves, relying on Sarah's intimate knowledge of the asylum's shift changes and the blind spots in its archaic security system. Their target, the secondary server room on the 3rd floor, deemed less risky than the sub-basement control room, but still a daunting challenge. Under the cloak of darkness, they moved like ghosts through the labyrinthine corridors. Eleanor wore dark clothing, her usual professional attire replaced by something that blended with the deep shadows. Sarah, in her grey nurse's uniform, seemed to melt into the institutional gloom. The few orderlies they encountered were either engrossed in their duties or caught in their own states of monotonous compliance, barely registering their presence. Yet, every faint sound, every distant echo sent a jolt of adrenaline through Eleanor. Their first obstacle was a locked door leading to a rarely used stairwell that bypassed the main, heavily trafficked corridors. Sarah produced a set of old, well-oiled master keys, a relic from her decades of service. The lock clicked open with a soft metallic groan, a sound that seemed amplified in the suffocating silence. They ascended, each step on the worn stone stairs echoing ominously. The third floor was eerily quiet, the patients largely sedated or in their deep, conditioned slumber. The server room was at the very end of a disused wing, disguised as a storage closet. Sarah pointed to the flimsy lock. "This one, I can pick," she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady. Her fingers, gnarled with age, worked with a practiced efficiency, and soon, a soft click announced their entry. Inside, the room hummed with the low thrum of old computer servers. Rows of dusty machines glowed with faint indicator lights, their antiquated technology a stark contrast to the sophisticated psychological manipulation they facilitated. The air was dry and smelled of ozone. Eleanor moved quickly to the main terminal, a bulky cathode ray screen monitor displaying lines of code. "We need the daily calibration logs," Eleanor muttered, her fingers flying across the keyboard, a skill honed from years of research and data analysis. "They'll show the precise frequencies, the power output, the duration of exposure. That's the hard evidence." As Eleanor furiously worked, Sarah stood guard at the door, her eyes scanning the empty corridor. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the wall further down the hall. A figure in an orderly uniform, larger and more imposing than the others Eleanor had seen, began to walk slowly towards them. It was a man with a heavy build and a perpetually sullen expression, known among the staff as Brute, one of Dr. Finch's most trusted enforcers. "Someone's coming!" Sarah hissed, her voice tight with panic. Eleanor cursed under her breath. She had almost found the correct directory. "Just a few more seconds, Sarah." Brute's footsteps, heavy and deliberate, grew louder. Sarah's face was pale. "He'll check this wing. He always does at this hour." With a final, desperate keystroke, Eleanor managed to copy a large encrypted file onto a small, discreet USB drive she carried. "Got it," she whispered, yanking the drive free. "Let's go." But it was too late. Brute was at the door, his eyes, dull and lifeless, fixed on them. "What are you two doing?" he rumbled, his voice a low growl. His hand went to the heavy set of keys on his belt. "Just checking the old servers," Sarah said, trying to sound nonchalant, her voice trembling. "A routine check for Dr. Finch." Brute took another step closer, his eyes narrowing, clearly suspicious. His hand, thick and powerful, reached for the doorknob. "No one checks these servers without authorization." Eleanor knew they couldn't afford to be caught. She reacted instinctively. Seeing a tall stack of empty server boxes by the door, she shoved them with all her might. The tower of cardboard toppled, collapsing with a deafening crash and scattering across the narrow corridor, blocking Brute's path for a critical moment. "Run, Sarah!" Eleanor yelled, grabbing the nurse's arm. They bolted, sprinting back the way they came, the sound of Brute's furious roar and the scramble of the boxes behind them. They didn't stop until they reached the staff stairwell, their chests heaving, hearts pounding. They burst out into a rarely used service entrance near the asylum's back gate, a gate Sarah knew to be less guarded. The rain had momentarily eased, replaced by a cold, biting wind. They had the evidence. The encrypted file on the USB drive containing the daily frequency calibration logs, the power outputs, and the specific sound patterns used to induce obedience. It was all there, but they had been seen. Dr. Finch would know. The price of truth was already being exacted, and the struggle to escape Holy Sepulchre had just become a desperate fight for survival. The asylum's true, chilling nature had been fully unmasked. The escape from the server room was just the beginning of their nightmare. Brute's thundering footsteps echoed behind them as Eleanor and Sarah scrambled through the service tunnels beneath the asylum, a damp, cramped maze of pipes and shadows. The air grew thick with the smell of stagnant water and mildew, each turn feeling like a gamble. Eleanor clutched the USB drive, its tiny form holding the explosive truth that could dismantle Dr. Finch's twisted empire. They emerged gasping into the cavernous, almost forgotten boiler room, a relic of the asylum's earliest days. The air was hot and humid, filled with the groaning and hissing of ancient machinery. Suddenly, the heavy steel door behind them burst open with a clang. "Doctor." Finch stood silhouetted against the dim light, flanked by Brute and two other hulking orderlies, their faces grim and determined. Finch's composure, usually so unnerving, had finally fractured. His eyes blazed with a cold, furious intensity. "You won't leave with our secrets, Dr. Vance." Finch's voice cut through the clamor of the machinery, sharp as a razor. "You've underestimated the depth of our commitment here. We are not just controlling minds, we are perfecting humanity, creating a compliant, harmonious society, free from the chaos of independent thought. And you, with your antiquated notions of free will, are a dangerous anomaly. You're not perfecting humanity, Finch, you're enslaving it," Eleanor retorted, her voice shaking but resolute. "You're brainwashing these people, stripping them of their autonomy, turning them into empty shells. This is a crime against humanity." "A necessary step," Finch countered, his voice chillingly calm despite the fury in his eyes. "Imagine a world without dissent, without conflict. We are on the precipice of achieving it. And your little drive won't change anything. No one will believe you. Who would suspect an esteemed institution like Holy Sepulchre?" Brute lunged forward, a massive hand reaching for Eleanor. Sarah, despite her age and frailty, reacted with surprising speed, kicking an old, rusted metal bucket into Brute's path. He stumbled, giving them a precious few seconds. "We need a distraction," Eleanor yelled, her eyes scanning the room. Her gaze fell on a series of large, red emergency valves on a pipe overhead. "The steam lines. Sarah, can you reach them?" Sarah, nimble despite her years, spotted a rickety ladder leading up to a maintenance platform. "I'll try," she gasped, scrambling up. As Brute recovered and charged again, Eleanor dodged behind a massive boiler, buying time. The other orderlies fanned out, attempting to corner her. The tension in the boiler room was palpable, a mix of fear, determination, and the oppressive heat. Just then, a low, guttural roar echoed from the far end of the boiler room near a service elevator. Marcus Thorne, his eyes wild and disoriented, stumbled out. He had followed them somehow. The obedience had been shattered, perhaps by the chaos, perhaps by Eleanor's earlier words, by the genuine empathy she had shown him. His usual vacant expression was replaced by a raw, primal confusion and a terrifying, uncontrolled rage. "The voice, it's screaming!" Marcus shrieked, clutching his head. He looked at Finch, his eyes locking onto the man who had been the source of his torment. A flicker of recognition, a primal memory of the obedience and the suffering it caused, ignited in his gaze. "Marcus, stay back," Eleanor yelled, but it was too late. With a guttural cry, Marcus launched himself at Dr. Finch, a desperate, almost suicidal act of defiance. The shock on Finch's face was momentary before he regained his composure, but the attack disrupted his immediate pursuit of Eleanor. As Finch and the orderlies wrestled with the suddenly violent Marcus, Sarah reached the valves. With a grunt of effort, she twisted the first one. A loud hiss filled the air as steam began to escape, followed by a piercing shriek from the pipes. She turned another and another. The room was instantly enveloped in a thick, blinding cloud of steam, making it impossible to see. "Now, Eleanor," Sarah's voice, muffled by the steam, guided her. Eleanor, disoriented but driven by urgency, scrambled towards the service exit Sarah had pointed out earlier. She heard the sounds of struggle behind her. Marcus's guttural cries, Finch's frustrated shouts, the clanging of metal. She risked a glance back and saw Marcus, fueled by a terrifying raw rage, actually holding Brute in a headlock, a testament to his sheer, unbridled fury after his years of suppressed agony. He wasn't in control, but his unleashed power was a devastating force. She burst through the exit door into the chilling night air, gasping. Sarah was right behind her, coughing and wheezing from the steam. They didn't look back. They ran, fueled by terror and a desperate hope, until the towering, monstrous silhouette of the Holy Sepulchre Asylum faded into the stormy darkness behind them, leaving only the sound of their ragged breaths and the distant, fading screams of a man finally breaking free. The drive back to Arkham was a blur, a frantic race against the fading night and the encroaching dawn. Eleanor drove with a singular focus. The image of Marcus Thorne's unleashed fury burned into her mind. Sarah, huddled in the passenger seat, shivered uncontrollably, not from cold, but from the raw trauma of their escape. The USB drive, clutched tightly in Eleanor's hand, felt less like proof and more like a ticking time bomb. Upon reaching Arkham, Eleanor made a calculated decision. The local police might be compromised or dismissive. She needed to go higher, faster. She drove straight to the offices of the Boston Globe, knowing their investigative journalism division had a reputation for tackling corruption and uncovering deep-seated secrets. It was a risk, but it was their best shot at getting the truth out before Dr. Finch could cover his tracks. It took hours of relentless argument, presenting her credentials and the harrowing, unbelievable story. But the sheer volume and specificity of the data on the USB drive, coupled with Sarah's corroborating testimony, eventually convinced a seasoned investigative reporter, a skeptical but ultimately intrigued veteran named Daniel Miller. The encrypted files, when finally decrypted by a tech expert at the Globe, laid bare the horrifying details. Precise low-frequency sound wave patterns, their power output measured in specific decibels, documented brainwave responses of patients under conditioning, and Dr. Finch's own chilling research notes on neurological compliance. The evidence was irrefutable. Within 48 hours, the story exploded. Headlines screamed, "Holy Sepulchre Asylum exposed, mind control experimentation uncovered." State and federal authorities, spurred by the Globe's exposé, raided the asylum. Dr. Finch, found calm and composed in his office, was arrested along with his complicit technical staff and key orderlies. Brute, after being subdued by a combined effort of the remaining asylum staff and Marcus's desperate fight, was also taken into custody. The aftermath was a slow, painful reckoning. Patients were rescued, many in profound states of catatonic obedience, others exhibiting extreme agitation and confusion from the sudden cessation of their constant conditioning. They were transferred to legitimate psychiatric facilities, beginning the long, arduous journey of rehabilitation. Eleanor, now hailed as a hero, dedicated herself to assisting in their recovery, particularly focusing on Marcus Thorne. Marcus's journey was the most challenging. The immediate cessation of the frequencies had left him in a state of profound disorientation and terror. The voice, once an unyielding command, was now a cacophony of echoes and phantom impulses, causing him immense distress. Eleanor worked tirelessly with him, employing true therapeutic techniques, talk therapy, gradual desensitization, and cognitive restructuring to help him rebuild his fractured mind. It was a slow process, filled with setbacks and moments of despair. But gradually, tiny fragments of the old Marcus Thorne began to re-emerge. He might never be entirely free from the psychological scars of Holy Sepulchre, but he was learning to distinguish his own thoughts from the insidious echoes of the voice. His recovery was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the devastating impact of the asylum's methods. Eleanor Vance, forever changed by her ordeal, continued her work as a psychiatrist, but with a renewed, more profound understanding of the fragility of the human mind and the dark capabilities of those who seek to control it. The Holy Sepulchre Asylum became a grim monument to a terrifying chapter in medical history, its decaying walls now silent, its secrets finally brought to light. The mystery of the obedience had been fully resolved, not by supernatural forces, but by the chillingly real, scientifically engineered manipulation of the human psyche. The experience had etched a deep understanding within Eleanor. True healing lay not in control, but in liberation, not in forced obedience, but in the painstaking, often messy journey towards self-discovery and freedom. The echoes of Holy Sepulchre would forever serve as a stark reminder of the ever-present need for vigilance against the subtle, insidious threats that seek to undermine the very essence of what it means to be human. If the horrifying truth of the Holy Sepulchre Asylum has left you breathless, remember to subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories that delve into the darkest corners of human nature. This is a work of fiction,